My name's Phil. I'm a SDET. I work for CBTNuggets.com. Longtime user of Sauce Labs, over 3 years now. Been to every SauceCon. I got to speak the last one. You guys paid me to go out to Austin and have a good time. It was awesome. And we are a huge proponent and user of WebdriverIO. Shout out to Christian and that whole community. We use it for everything. It's a very powerful framework, and it's going to be what my demo is about, is using WebdriverIO with Sauce Visual. We were actually a screener customer, and they were acquired by Sauce Labs. So it's kind of cool. Our partnership sort of all came together. And shout out to Loyal from Screener. So very cool dude. I got to meet him at SauceCon. I really like that guy. And I went ahead and put together a demo that's going to show how it's a very simple test of just one page, our home page, and how we use WebdriverIO to test that here at CBT Nuggets. So this is a demo on how we use WebdriverIO to do visual regression over Sauce Labs using Screener. Well, Screener's incorporated in, but we're still hitting the Screener endpoint. And so what I use in WebdriverIO is I use Commander to assemble command line, right? So I'm going to pass all of these things in. Here's my spec. Here's the name of my visual regression test, my options for visual regression, the browser I want to use, and I'm going to run a new test. We're going to start from scratch here and show you how this works. So we're going to create a visual branch called Home QA Nugs Demo 1 at Screener. And the URL we're testing is our homepage in our QA environment. Okay, so I don't want to get too heavy into this, but basically these are the options that get created through our command line. And so we're telling WebdriverIO to connect to this endpoint, and this endpoint is interested in these capabilities, and the visual regression endpoint also is interested in these things, right? So now you'll notice, and this is going to be important later, one of the things we turn off in our options that we send to the Sauce Visual is we tell it content is false, meaning we don't care if something on our page if it has different text, because we use dynamic text in a lot of our components. But we do want to be strict on structure, layout, and style, right? So those are the options we send. And we have a few things that we ignore by default. So I can send in a list of class names or IDs to tell Screener to don't do a compare on this. Like we have a chat bar that sometimes slides out, sometimes doesn't. So if that's the thing, don't let me know about it, right? So yeah, so this all came from our command line. I already ran another test, and I wanted to show you what the options look like here. So the project name's this. The branch this time is going to be this when it's done. That's from the last one. So, and yeah, those are all the things. So, right. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what the test looks like. So here's our test, and we're using synchronous mode with WebdriverIO and Mocha. And so in our before hook, we're going to start that visual endpoint by calling the init, visual init. We're going to load this, inject the script, run it, give it a little description, right? So that gets loaded. We're going to open the URL we want to test. That gets called home.base URL through my object creation. And then we're going to take a snapshot of that page after it loads. And passing in what we want to call it. And also, you can pass in ignore stuff in the visual snapshot command too. So these would get added to that if you don't pass it in initially. So, and then at the end of the test, we call visual end, and we're going to get a value back, and it should be success, meaning nothing didn't match. Okay,
So that page looks the way we expected it to. Nothing changed. And then if we get a success, we're going to make sure that the values are 0 that changed, right? So if that happens, we can assume our test went well. But the first time we run a test, it's going to fail because we need to establish a baseline. You can accept that automatically. I'm not going to because I'm going to walk you through what it looks like. So we're going to go ahead and run our test. And it's off. And the content is false. And again, we're going to be strict on our layout and our structure and our style. But again, we're establishing a baseline now, so those things don't come into play, right? So that's spinning up on the screener side. Okay, so we see our test is running on the screener side. And right on. So again, that's taking our first snapshot, creating a baseline in our branch called Home QA Nugs Demo 1 in our project called Homepage. Okay, so it fails. It's blue because it's new and it needs to be accepted, right? So we're going to go ahead and accept all. Okay? So now we have a baseline for the page that's on QA Nuggets. So now we're going to run our test again. So now it's going to go look at QA Nuggets again, compare that snapshot to our baseline. And I'm hoping it finds some diffs, because I want to show you how we can ignore things real easily. So there we go. It's off again. Okay, one of the things I wanted to show you. Okay, so it's done. It's just not quite updated. But the cool thing is this is running over Sauce Labs. And so you can actually connect to that job at Sauce Labs now. And you can see your test had what happened, right? You have the whole test. It's just going to load the page, right? So it loaded the browser. Boom. We did execute, right? And yeah, we got our snapshot. And that was there. Boom, took the snapshot, right? Sent that off to Screener. So very cool how Sauce and the Screener input are connected now. And you can actually get to that VM that you ran your test on. Okay, so this passed. It didn't find any changes that time. Okay? So that's good. I'm going to try it one more time. I think it might find something, and I could show you how to ignore it. Just a second. Well, it looks like we're getting lucky. Normally, I can get a diff to show up on this guy. Sometimes that structure changes, and we allow that. I would just ignore it. But it looks like that's been changed since the last time I was testing this page. So, but yeah, you'll see your diffs here. And the cool thing is you can just select it and ignore it. So if it's something you expect to change and you're not real worried about it, Screener makes it, Sauce Lab Screener makes it real easy to deal with that. So that's cool. So now, we ran this over Chrome, and I'll show you, because we're using Sauce Labs, that we can do this in parallel on multiple browsers. So this time, now I might have to establish baselines here because these are going to be new tests, right? So we're going to do Firefox, and I want to do Edge, and see what that does. So that should spin up 2 tests. So now we're running it in parallel. We want to test this page on these browsers, right? Okay, and that's spun up. So notice we only have Chrome here. So now we're working on Firefox and Edge. And again, we can go watch this test over Sauce Labs while it's happening. Wow, right? So it's done. You You get access to all your logs just like you would with any other Sauce Labs test, which is really cool. All right, so not quite back to my end. Still some communication happening here. Okay, so it's done. We got a failure because we have new tests. Because these are new browsers, it's new tests. So we have to accept the baseline for these guys, right? So we're just going to go ahead and say, yeah, it was the first test on those. That should be cool, right? Save those. And now all those are accepted. And it's set to pass now, right? So now let's run it again at all three browsers. So we're going to add Chrome back in here. We can hit these in parallel. And there we go. And again, if we go to show logs, these are all Sauce Labs VMs that are spinning up. And we can get to them and watch the test. So here's our first one. I bet you it's Chrome. No, it's Edge, I think. All right. So here's our test in real time. This wasn't available before the screener and Sauce Labs got together, so this is really cool. All right, we'll let those run. Okay, on this run, we found some changes. So, looks like we found a change on Chrome and Edge, and Firefox is still running. All right, let's go ahead and let that complete. So it looks like they all failed. They found diffs on each browser. So let's go see why. So we go in here, and here's our Chrome test. Here's our Firefox. Here's our Edge. So let's see what happened here. Oh, it was the thing I was hoping for. Okay, so yeah, occasionally this layout shifts, and I am going to accept that. I'm going to say that's fine in this part too. Okay, I'm going to let that move a little, and then go back, and we'll do the same thing here. We're going to set up our, see how easy this is? I can just click to ignore. And Screener remembers that, as long as the browser version is the same. When it runs this test again, Screener remembers those things to ignore. Okay. And last one. We're going to go ahead and accept that. Accept that. All right. So now when we run this test, it should pass because we're telling it to ignore that, and everything else should match. Okay. Now, when I say match, visually, right? This is our baseline, and this was the current test. These are the same. Some of the text may be different because I'm allowing for content change, but the overall layout and structure is going to be the same. And if it's not, Screener is going to catch it. Now, why? And this is the cool thing about visual regression, right? To do this without visual regression, I would have to write a test, know all of these elements in the DOM, know where all of these images are supposed to be, what text value is supposed to be here, etc. I mean, it's just impossible. Visual regression makes that easy. You just take a snapshot, and it's not just looking at the picture; it's looking at the DOM for differences that you want to find, and it's also saying I'm allowing differences, so I could tell it what to ignore, etc. So it's very powerful. Saves you writing an end-to-end test that would scrape the DOM and make sure everything is in the right place would be a nightmare, right? So that's what visual regression gives us. So let's run this again and prove this out, okay? So we're saying everything's going to pass this time on all those browsers. Okay, and as expected and hoped for, our baselines all match our current snapshot because we allowed that to ignore that one structural change that I was expecting. That's kind of cool. I'm glad that worked out. So, yeah, we this could get real heavy, and I hope I was able to make it make some sense. But that's the very simple way of explaining how we use WebdriverIO and Sauce Labs visual regression. And I hope it's helpful to you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Phil, for sharing your demo. I know it's always great to have it recorded because we know when it's live, there's always something that can go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
There are a couple of questions that I have for you if you don't mind answering them.
For sure.
Yeah, if you can share with everyone who's attending, like what was your setup like before adding visual end-to-end?
Before we did visual regression at all, we were just relying on end-to-end tests, and we weren't doing visual regression. So about 3 years ago, we started looking at some other solutions, and we came across Screener, and that was the one that we chose to go to. And we chose to start doing visual regressions for the reasons I explained. So we don't have to write, end-to-end tests that have to crawl the DOM and make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. Visual regression does that for you. So that's why, yeah.
And can you share some of like the continuous benefits that you see from visual end-to-end?
Yeah, so one of the things we do, and I kept this demo really simple. One of the things we're doing at CBT Nuggets is every time we deploy our site, we use CloudFormation as our build system, and we use CloudFront. So everything's regional across the world. There's all these caches going on, right? And so when we deploy our site, it goes to origin, and then origin goes out into all those proxy caches everywhere. And so we have to invalidate those routes to make sure that the content in origin gets replaced quickly, okay? So one of the things you can do now with Screener, Sauce Visual, is in that test I just did, I was pointing at the baseline, right? I can tell that test to look at another baseline from another branch, right? So when I'm testing QA nuggets, I could tell that test, use origin.QA nuggets as your baseline. So not only am I testing my visual regressions working correctly, but I'm testing that our caching is working correctly and that origin matches what is out in those proxy caches all over the internet, right? So yeah.
Is there anything that you would recommend for someone that's wanting to get the setup for their team?
Use WebdriverIO. I mean, yeah, it makes it really easy.
Do you have any experience of testing one-page applications? Are there any challenges?
Not anything more than what I've already shown. I mean, the dynamic content was the big challenge, but again, Screener makes that really easy because you can allow dynamic content with what I showed by telling just don't use content, right? Mm-hmm. And then being able to ignore things, you can ignore through the execute command. You can ignore through the options that you send in. All of those things make it very easy for a page that's very brittle, right? And very prone to change. You could still be as strict as you want with it.
How easy is it to set up and start visual testing? Any challenges during initial setup and running visual testing?
It's not too difficult. Screener has some really good documentation. It's very up to date. And yeah, I think it's okay.
Awesome.
Also, for different frameworks, you're not forced to use WebdriverIO. I just encourage you to. But they have examples of different frameworks to use. So whatever you're already using, you could probably just use.
Can this be used to test response for a chat box?
Sure. I mean, so you send a message from one chat window to the next chat window, right? And then you want to take a snapshot of that and make sure it got that text. That would totally work. You could do that. Now, chat window to chat window, yeah. That's kind of, you have to use two devices for that. So that's a whole thing. I haven't done that, but I'm sure it's possible to do. So WebdriverIO has a way to do that. And so your framework has a way to run a test where you can control two devices. You're just going to run the snapshot on the device that you sent the text to, and that should work by doing that.
Okay. And if a network has delays that causes images to load slowly, how could we manage that? Or are there any settings or setups, waiting times, pooling?
So in WebdriverIO, that browser URL command, it won't return until the page is loaded. So now, okay, and we've actually found visual regression issues where our page loads, but there's loading bubbles down at the bottom, right? So we had a problem with an endpoint where some data didn't go back, and the snapshot caught that. So it's like, hey, there was a diff here. And what was different is, hey, there's loading bubbles where they're not supposed to be. And that could have been a network issue, right? But it actually was the back end endpoint was running really slowly. So yeah, between those things, it's pretty easy to figure it out.
Okay. And if screen resolutions change, can it recognize it correctly? Are there settings that a user would have to make?
With resolutions?
Yeah.
I have used different resolutions and everything seems to be okay. I've shrunk things down like mobile size, etc. And yeah, all that seems to work.
Let's see, tons of questions coming in right now. Can you test any website, or is it dependent on anything?
Yeah, any website that your test can get to, right? So now if you may need to use, you can even test it local. If you're using Sauce Connect, you can get into a tunnel and test your local development environment too. So yeah.
And when content type is ignored and it doesn't match the specific text that's displayed, does it check that text that's displayed at all?
I think Loyal would have a better answer to that, but I'm going to guess and say that Screener says, hey, this text is different, but I don't care because I'm not supposed to look at content. So it has to see it first to know not to, right? So that's what I think's happening.
Do you have to create a baseline for each resolution's examples, desktop size versus mobile size, or only one baseline is needed?
I believe you would need a baseline for each resolution because the DOM is going to be different.
No.
I mean, I don't know. Haven't tested it, but I think you're going to need to do that.
Okay. Trying to read this one. When we have the data in the page change because we hit a button or go to a new tab, is this considered visual test or functional test? Would I be right in saying that visual test supports functional?
Well, it's a functional test because you're testing that you're getting to the new tab, right? So now once you get to the new tab, you can say, I want to take a snapshot of that and make sure it looks the way that I expect it to.
See, does this help in checking translated pages if there is a change in the translations text?
Yeah, it would catch that.
Yeah, it does check for content changes. Phil, do you have any recommendations to a team that isn't doing visual testing currently?
I would recommend that you do visual testing for the reasons we've explained. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, any advice that you want to share to the QA teams that are out there that are attending or will be watching the recording later on?
Be brave. Do visual regression. If you haven't done it, get your feet in the water and go at it. It's worth it.
And then if someone wants to get started,
go to the Screener site, get yourself set up. And again, the documentation's all there. That's how I did it. And there's YouTube videos. There's resources out there aside from that too. So yeah.
For the application that has a lot of new features in its sprint and is rapidly developed, if a new item will appear at the screen not related to the test flow, functional tests will pass. What about visual testing?
Well, it depends where you took the snapshot and what you're expecting to be there, right? So if your app added a new component and the baseline doesn't have it, it's going to fail, right? So you either have to accept that or reject it, depending on what you're expecting.
Phil, is there anything that you want to share before we send everyone off to a quick coffee stretch break?
Thanks for having me. Sauce Labs has been a huge partner to us and continues to be, and I'm just stoked to be here and happy you had me.